Hello, I'm Jonasz Czerwiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we pick up an anchor off the Baltic Sea floor and say, hey, you dropped this. On Christmas Day, because apparently sabotage simply cannot take a holiday, someone decided to sever a cable carrying electricity from Finland to Estonia, along with 4 other submarine cables carrying critical data. Sure, you could argue Santa got caught in a strong current, but Finnish authorities found something a bit more suspicious: an anchor drag mark. Now, unless Santa's sleigh is sporting a brand new set of maritime hooks, there is reason to believe this anchor might belong to a tanker in Russia's shadow fleet, tasked with circumventing Western sanctions. It seems that while many of us were busy unwrapping gifts and stress-eating, Vladimir Putin was out delivering lumps of global chaos. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report on this issue.
Is this one of the now infamous vessels belonging to Russia's so-called shadow fleet? A shadow ship is an aging vessel with very obscure ownership. The Eagle S fits the bill as it is registered in the Cook Islands. Finnish authorities have seized this vessel, and the travel ban has been slapped on its crew as the investigation continues. The ship is suspected of having cut the S-Link 2 undersea cable, which carries power between Finland and Estonia. The Eagle S is also believed to have ties to Russia. But the answer to whether this incident is part of Moscow's broader hybrid war against Europe will require a more in-depth investigation.
It's too soon to draw conclusions yet why this happened. We know who did it.
There have been other incidents like the one involving S-Link 2 in recent months. The Yipeng 3, a Chinese vessel, is suspected of having cut through an undersea cable linking Sweden and Lithuania in November 2024. These cables are vital not just to European energy security, but also NATO and member state military communications in the region. The Kremlin, of course, denies involvement in any such incidents. Yet these suspected acts of sabotage grew more frequent only after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The damage done to critical undersea infrastructure is not only costly, but also time-consuming. It will take until mid-2025 to repair the S-Link 2.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Just last month, a Chinese ship was also believed to have cut 2 data cables in Swedish waters, allegedly at Moscow's behest. First Sweden, then Finland. And it's not limited to maritime mischief either. Russian operatives have apparently gone all in on the hybrid attacks buffet, planting incendiary devices on a cargo plane in Germany, plotting to kill the head of a major German weapons manufacturer, and they've also allegedly been committing arson in Poland, Britain and Germany, as well as meddling in elections in Romania and Moldova. According to NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, this is all part of an intensifying campaign of hybrid attacks across our allied territories. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hybrid is a term we usually reserve for cars. But in the realm of international conflict, hybrid war means something very, very different. Cyber attacks, sabotage, disinformation campaigns, just to keep your adversaries perpetually off balance. Let's take a quick crash course in the phrase hybrid war. The term originated with former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, who introduced it in a speech made in 2005. Mattis used the term hybrid war to break us out of the binary logic that assumes we're either in a nice, tidy period of peace or a raging conventional war. Spoiler alert, the world is rarely that well organized. If a pipeline is sabotaged but no gunfire is exchanged, are we at war? If the cables to your internet are maliciously cut, but the saboteur only whistles nonchalantly, is that an act of war? Mattis's point is we might miss the subtle warfare happening right under our nose if we insist on waiting for bombs and blitzkriegs. Take China, for example. In 1999, 2 People's Liberation Army colonels wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare. In this book, they advocated everything from bribery of foreign legislators to hacking networks and even assassinating financial executives. Then there is Iran, which has been pursuing a hybrid warfare approach across the Middle East, backing proxy militias like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. This includes interfering in US elections and even hiring criminals to take out opponents abroad. But the gold medal in hybrid warfare year after year belongs, no surprises there, to Russia. Whether it's sending mercenaries to Africa, undermining democracies with troll farms, or supporting breakaway republics, Putin's regime is on a mission to regain the Soviet Union's old swagger. So, how should the West respond, aside from collectively rolling its eyes at every new chunk of underwater cable that mysteriously snaps? We can ramp up legal actions, ramp up cyber offensives, and yes, even sabotage Russia's beloved shadow fleet. One big reason to do all this is simple. If we wait for a real war, we might not notice the creeping incrementalism that's already happening. Today, it's an anchor here, a severed cable there. Tomorrow, it could be something far worse. We need a broader view of warfare, one that says, wait, that tanker has been circling the same spot in the Baltic for days. Maybe we should check out on that. In short, the West needs a new approach to an old problem. We must meet hybrid warfare with hybrid warfare, and that means standing up, showing strength, and recognizing that there is no such thing as a day off in modern conflict. Because if we have learned anything from a year of severed cables and anchor drags, it's that ignoring these clues of covert warfare is not a gift we want to give. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Dr. Jacek Raubo, Editor-in-Chief, Director at the Analysis Division of Defense 24. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
So, we as Europeans have spent quite a lot of time complaining about hybrid war, but are we ready to fight a hybrid war?
I suppose we spent a lot of time about the discussion of the definition of the hybrid warfare and the hybrid war. Right now, we are dealing with some different tasks, how to deal with the different formats of some illegal actions against our security coming from Russia. And this is the most problematic situation because for the classical defense and deterrence missions, we are much better prepared than before. But for the different actions coming from, for instance, intelligence agencies from Russia, I think we are still having a large number of problems how to solve our security dilemmas and how to build the effective deterrence. Why? Mostly because we are dealing with various types of actions. And this spectrum of some hybrid forms of aggression is always difficult to defend by, of course, the legal side of it, but also from the practical side. One very easy case, we are talking about, for instance, the large number of incidents with some Russian intelligence agencies. So we need to build a more effective counterintelligence shield to provide this effective security formula for our societies. But without it, we need to inform societies more, we need to learn societies more, and I think this is the task for the future.
So now we have the case of the Eagle S, the tanker that was essentially held up by the Finnish services under suspicion of having been implicated in the destruction of undersea infrastructure. So far, it seems that we're taking a law enforcement approach, essentially investigating this as a criminal offense. Do you think that this is the right option for the time being? And at which point should we switch gears to a military approach? By which I don't mean full-scale war or anything like this, but basically an approach that focuses more, for example, on escorting these ships, monitoring them using military drones and things like that.
Thank you for emphasizing this issue, because Still, we are in peace? No, I think we are in the crisis with, of course, Russian aggression against Ukraine and some other forms of aggression against our own security and sovereignty. That's why I think law enforcement agencies are, of course, in the epicentric of these actions to provide, for instance, security for our critical infrastructure. But on the other hand, we need to have a strong presence of military capabilities as a supporter for the law enforcement agencies and other structures. That's why I think we are observing right now a large number of maneuvers and also some other exercises dedicated to military, dedicated to NATO presence, not only on the Baltic Sea, but also in a wider perspective of eastern flank and also northern flank. So I think we are in the middle of this situation between the peace and the war, and that's why we need to have more comprehensive approach. And we see that the European Union, NATO are strictly combine their own actions. So I'm much more optimistic in this compared to the awareness inside our societies.
So can we actually eliminate the Russian shadow fleet from the Baltic altogether, or at least bring it under control? Is this a task that we can accomplish at this stage?
I suppose we are able to do it with, of course, some consensus between the various states and various organizations. Right now, I think this task needs to be solved by three different layers. First is the legal side. I'm not the lawyer, so I think we need to focus more on this legal aspect with other experts. But from the practical side, two other layers are much more important. The first is this synergy between different actions coming from the various NATO or European members. I'm talking about intelligence sharing. I'm talking about strictly some combined operation against this Russian shadow fleet. And the third layer, I think, is also very practical. We need to build more capacity to have this opportunity to react much faster than before the 2022 and this Russian aggression against Ukraine. So I think right now we need to form more practical tools to support our actions, and I think this is something which is happening right now with, of course, the role of the Nordic state and also other states like Poland. And that might be the key aspect for our presidency in European Union for next month. So from the practical side, yes, I think we are able to do it. From the legal side, I think we need to talk more about this legal and international agreements and legal aspects dedicated to some codes inside various states.
Of course, I mean, there's also the question of the freedom of navigation, the international law of the sea, and so on. But coming back to hybrid war, I asked you about fighting a hybrid war in the very first question, because so far it seems like we are reacting, we are responding, we are trying to deter the Russians. But what about taking the fight to them, tit-for-tat moves, waging a hybrid war against certain operations in a very similar manner? Do you think that this should still be something of a taboo? Because, you know, after all, we have rule of law, we are democratic. So in theory, when we're thinking about using similar methods, many people will say, no, we cannot do that. But should we think about it, at least to some extent?
I suppose so. The better term is warfare than war. So this hybrid warfare is right now existing close to our borders, close to our cybersecurity, close to our information security. And I think warfare is not only the action to be reactive. We need to be active. And I fully agree with you that this is a very difficult task for the democracies, because we are not able to use the same active measures as, for instance, Russia or other Russian allies. But on the other hand, I'm much more open for taking some lessons learned coming from, for instance, Israel. when they have been under the constant attacks from the kinetic proxy Iranian allies, they sometimes use, for instance, clandestine cyber operations. So I think we might think about better response by using our own cyber tools against, for instance, maritime forces of Russia.
Now, that's a very important point, isn't it? I mean, but do you think there is a risk that the escalations manager are going to step in and say, no, this is going to be escalatory, and Russia will play on that, saying, yeah, if there is anything happening that we find suspicious, we're going to threaten the use of nuclear weapons or something like that? Asking just because this has been a universal axiom for many leaders, you know, don't poke the bear. But it's not been very efficient, was it?
Well, I'm sure that we can be transparent. We can be fully transparent from the Russian side. We can be much more open for, I don't know, control of our exercises. And we will still have some Russian threats from Moscow, from Kremlin, that they will use nuclear weapons. So I think we need to avoid this format of thinking that we need to think that what Russia will do. I think we need to be much more active, and in 2025, I think this is the time when we will be able to get our lessons learned from the Russian threats from the past few years and to formulate maybe a new approach to Russia. Of course, we need to accept that Russian side is still the power with nuclear weapons. But on the other hand, we need to be much more flexible in our actions.
So let's do a hypothetical scenario. Russia uses GPS jamming in the Baltic, originating from Kaliningrad. In this hypothetical scenario, a civilian airliner is jammed while flying near Kaliningrad, plummets to the sea, there are casualties. What should be our response? Russia clearly would expect us to engage in never-ending debates, discussions, conferences, and not responding at all.
I suppose we have a lot of our tools dedicated to this kind of a crisis. First of all, there is, for instance, a show of force, and also some actions defined to deterrence Russian threat, and also electronic warfare, because still Russia is doing this without control, without this democratic control in their own society. We need to accept that democracies need to be much more patient in their response, even if we are under attack, but below the threshold of war. So I'm much more optimistic when I'm thinking about our response in this hypothetical scenario, because we are taking this lessons learned from the Russian activities, also in electronic warfare, in cyber operations, and I'm sure that we have this capabilities to strike back. A very tough strike back can be visible if Russia will decide to cross some borderlines.
Dr. Jacek Raubo was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now, moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukraine ended its gas transit agreement with Russia on the 1st of January. For the last year, the European Commission has been hard at work to prepare the bloc for this moment by strengthening the EU's gas infrastructure network.
The Commission has confirmed that it has been working with the EU's member states to secure alternative gas supplies to affected countries in Central and Eastern Europe. The bloc's gas infrastructure is now reportedly more than ready and flexible enough to accept deliveries from non-Russian sources. The end to Ukraine's gas deal with Russia plays into the European Union's policy of cutting itself off from Russian energy, which it has been introducing since Moscow's invasion. This divestment doesn't always go as smoothly as expected, however, and there is collateral. Some regions in Europe, like Transnistria, have been left without centralized heating as Russian supply has stopped. Restarting the region's heating system could take up to 2 weeks, Transnistrian authorities say. In the meantime, the region's families will have to endure harsh winter conditions.
The Financial Times has published its annual forecast for 2025. According to the newspaper's predictions, a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia will be signed, but will require very significant US pressure on Moscow.
The paper believes that the US administration will have to threaten Moscow with much tougher sanctions and boost support for Ukraine to force the Kremlin into negotiations it will take seriously. The forecast also suggests that Kiev could agree to a deal in which Russia keeps control of the territory it currently occupies, but not in a legal sense, and with some possible land exchanges on the table. Ukraine would receive US-backed security guarantees from Europe, but its NATO membership will likely be put on hold, even though Donald Trump isn't expected to immediately block it. In terms of 2024, the Financial Times' forecast correctly predicted continued US and EU support for Ukraine throughout the year, as well as the Israel-Hamas conflict not escalating beyond the region. One event the prognosis got wrong, however, was Trump winning the presidency.
With the start of the year, Ukraine has become party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Kiev now has all the rights and obligations of a signatory of this international treaty.
The Ukrainian parliament ratified the Rome Statute in August 2024, 24 years after Kiev had first signed it. With Ukraine, there are now 125 states which have ratified the treaty. Both Russia and the US had signed it in the past, but later withdrew. The treaty is the legal foundation of the International Criminal Court and grants an institution jurisdiction over 4 crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Ukraine ratified a statute under the condition that for 7 years after its signing, Kiev will not recognize the ICC's jurisdiction over Ukrainian citizens in the case of war crimes. In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin, Russian Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights Maria Lvova-Belova, former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and Russia's General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov.
Russia has reportedly established an air bridge between Syria and Libya. This could mean that Moscow is evacuating significant numbers of equipment and troops from the Middle East to North Africa.
2 strategic airlifters belonging to the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations have been coursing between Russia and the Al-Qadim air base in Libya, where Russian mercenaries are stationed. The base also hosted a Russian transport aircraft, which departed from the Russian base in Latakia, Syria, over Christmas. This was the first time an aircraft had flown between the two since the fall of the Assad regime in early December. Italian website Itamil Radar says that the planes would usually treat the base in Libya as a quick stop on the way to other destinations. In the case of the cargo aircraft in December, it had stayed at the base for several hours and then returned to Syria. The recent changes suggest that Moscow is focusing on transferring its military assets from Syria to Libya instead of Russia itself. In turn, this could mean that Russia is focusing on Libya and North Africa to a far greater extent than before.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.